Here's an interesting question. What is a denial bubble, as I would call it? What is it to live in denial of a certain reality of life? Call it a premise, if you will, a core premise. To deny it by way of isolating into an environment where all you hear is reinforcement of that denial. Now, a year ago, I was at a park, a very small dog park in a small town, and I heard one person talking with another of how we're so fractionated now into watching our favorite channel on TV, hundreds of them. It used to be, well, just a few channels on TV, news channels 40 years ago, like ABC, NBC, CBS. Now we have hundreds of channels. And our favorite actors, actresses, novelists, writers in general, talk show hosts, even communities or parts of communities within larger areas. It's even said in New York City that if you were to want to live there, you have to be aware that the flavor of the neighborhood or city can change block by block, sometimes immensely. I call these bubbles. Bubbles that constrain you to hear only a certain point of view, I would say on a certain denial or more, or sometimes more rarely a certain virtue, a certain truth. Thus, some people seeking out what they call an ashram or farm, so to speak. Sometimes deleteriously, like Osho's farm out there in Oregon, which got him in trouble and arguably some people on the farm suffering greatly, it's been said. And at one point in time, it may have been closed down or castigated in the public area, and he arrested. This is something becoming more and more of a phenomenon, I believe, even with regard to putting an app on your phone that gives you access to your favorite podcaster or favorite channel for courses and more courses and more courses from your bubble leader, as I call it, with a certain twist, generally conveying a certain denial, or two or three, or more rarely a certain virtue, certain truth, but not necessarily free of any denials therein also, simply your favorite package of truths and denials in a bubble form, and isolating from all the rest. It used to just be if you wanted to isolate, you'd go to the hills, whether it's Appalachia or the forests of Vermont, Maine. Neary, for instance, comes to mind with Maine. Or you'd go to the bush of Alaska, or you'd leave the country entirely. Now, though, we can just sit in our own little bubbles, call it an apartment or house, come home, let's say after work, if working outside the home, lock the doors at 5, isolate in our homes with our bubbles, conveyed to us by TV, internet, apps on the phone, favorite YouTube providers, they call them channels, what have you. You can even get Vimeo channels to your specific bubble desire. This is something I heard just a snippet of at the park, a dog park a year ago in a tiny town. And I think we all know more or less what I'm talking about, but not necessarily with great clarity. Now, of course, this can be, in the past, conveyed by certain political leaders, sometimes in dire times called demagogues or worse, leading even world wars. Or they can be particularly commonplace and popular religious leaders here and there in any country on the planet. Often at high positions in their religious structure or as very popular in the country and over the world on an independent basis. I call this living in a bubble and thus isolating in general. And granted, We all need a certain amount of isolating to prevent overload, or when information is too corrupted with bad premises and other, or malicious talk in general, or aggressiveness. And yet to totally withdraw 24/7, 365 is to deprive ourselves of so much. I remember 3 years ago meeting a man who attends a church, and the pastor said he didn't want anyone viewing anything on the internet at all. And I've met other people who are quite religious who use a blocking function on their phones to prevent watching of any YouTube shows sent to them by email or messaging. How interesting thus. Bubbles, bubbles, bubbles. Bubbles to ingest our favorite denial of choice. Used to just be the phrase drug of choice, including food. I would like to throw out there the concept of denial of choice, as well as truth of choice even. Maybe truth in the true sense, that it's accurate in a world where truth sometimes is not so easily identified, clarified, or in the best interest of certain persons to see spread or just made available for obvious consumption by observation and time on hand. Bubbles, bubbles, bubbles.